Welcome to Thread of Terror. We bring you the creepiest stories from Reddit. Dim the lights, grab a blanket, and hit subscribe so you never miss a scare. People who like to explore abandoned buildings. What was the biggest "fuck this, I'm out" moment you had while exploring? Story 1. Terrifying urban exploration.
A group of us decided to explore an old, abandoned care home. Rest assured, we entered legally, but nothing could have prepared us for what we were about to encounter. The moment we stepped inside, we were swallowed by darkness, an oppressive, suffocating kind of darkness where you could not even see your hand in front of your face, no matter how long you let your eyes adjust. Thankfully, we had a few reliable light sources with us, but even those seemed feeble against the overwhelming blackness. As we wandered through the decayed corridors, the silence was deafening, broken only by the occasional creak of our footsteps or the faint rustle of debris. Evidence of squatters was everywhere. Old, tattered belongings and makeshift beds scattered across various rooms. Though unsettling, it was clear that no one was currently there, a relief we clung to in that eerie place. Eventually, we came to a room that will haunt us forever. Graffiti covered the walls, but this was no ordinary graffiti. Instead of paint, the words and symbols were smeared in what appeared to be dried blood and human waste. The stench was unbearable, a sickening mixture that churned our stomachs and made the air almost impossible to breathe. The words themselves were illegible, more like chaotic scrawls and symbols, but their presence felt malevolent, as though they were marking something deeply sinister. None of us dared to linger. Fear clawed at the edges of our sanity, and we could feel unseen eyes watching us from the shadows. The oppressive atmosphere became too much to bear. Without a word, we turned and fled, our footsteps echoing through the hollow halls as we made our way back to safety. None of us looked back, too afraid of what we might see if we did. That was the first and last time any of us stepped foot in that place. To this day, the memory of that room, with its grotesque stench and horrifying graffiti, remains burned into our minds. What had happened there, and why, we will never know, and perhaps it is better that way.
Story 2. Horrors of an abandoned chapel.
Several years ago, a gruesome murder shocked the city I was working in. Parts of a man's body had been found at various locations. A hand here, a foot there. A week had passed, and the case remained unsolved. At the time, I was working as an architectural designer, surveying an old abandoned chapel slated for renovation into condominiums. The chapel had long been vacant, though it was clear from the scattered belongings that homeless individuals had been using it for shelter. The main chapel was unnerving enough, with its broken pews and shattered stained glass windows casting eerie shadows. But it was when I descended into the basement that I truly felt a sense of unease. The air was heavy and putrid, carrying a stench that seemed to claw at the back of my throat. It was clear that someone had either been there recently or was still nearby. The smell was overwhelming, the kind that sends shivers down your spine even when you cannot explain why. With no electricity in the building, the basement was plunged into darkness, my flashlight barely cutting through the oppressive gloom. The atmosphere felt suffocating, and every instinct in me screamed to leave. I decided not to push my luck and quickly made my way out, never venturing into the attached building that was part of the property. 2 days later, the news broke. The torso and head of the murdered man had been discovered in that very building attached to the chapel. My stomach dropped as I realized how close I had been to finding those remains. That smell in the basement, the one that had sent me running, was likely a harbinger of what lay just beyond. To this day, I cannot shake the feeling that I narrowly avoided a scene far more horrifying than I could have ever imagined. The memory of that basement and its suffocating stench still lingers, a chilling reminder of how close I came to crossing paths with something unspeakable.
Story 3. The dark secrets of the abandoned manor.
We decided to explore an abandoned manor with some friends. We'd been drinking and smoking and thought it would be an exciting adventure. The ground floor entrances were bricked up, so we had to climb through a precarious opening on the first floor, about 8 feet above the ground. The makeshift ladder was unstable and clumsy, made from old trash and wooden planks. It was difficult to climb, and with 5 or 6 of us trying to get up, it felt slow and dangerous. Knowing this was our only way in or out made me uneasy the whole time. Once inside, we explored the floor. The first thing that caught our attention was a beautiful glass ceiling, though it was shattered in places. Everywhere there was debris scattered across the floor. But then, things took a strange turn. We found a room filled with large plastic containers, some filled with a disturbing mixture of pink and brown liquids. The sight of it left us uneasy, but we pressed on. A few of my friends decided to venture to the ground floor, which was shrouded in complete darkness. The stairs were broken, with several steps missing, and it was difficult to see. As they slowly descended, they heard a faint, unsettling cough in the distance, followed by the sound of soft footsteps in the shadows. Their eyes adjusted to the dark, and they felt as though multiple people were moving in the pitch-black space with them. It was almost as though they weren't alone. Meanwhile, I remained on the first floor. Suddenly, I heard the distinct sound of someone carefully stepping through the broken glass. The deliberate, cautious steps echoed in the silence, as if someone was intentionally trying not to make a sound. The atmosphere grew thick with dread, and my heart began to race. Something was definitely off about this place. Panicked, we decided it was time to leave. As we made our way out, we saw something that made our blood run cold. A rough-looking man emerged from a shack outside the manor. His eyes were bloodshot, and his stare was intense and unsettling, locking onto us as we passed by. The sight of him lingered in my mind, and the look he gave us haunted me for days. In the end, we realized it was probably just someone who had been living there, but for a group of overly frightened 15-year-olds, it was enough to send us running.
Story 4. Creepy secret of the old cabin.
One evening, curiosity got the better of me, and I decided to explore an old abandoned cabin in my neighborhood. The place had been vacant for years, and rumors had spread about strange happenings inside. As I cautiously approached the cabin, the air felt heavier, colder, almost as if the house itself was watching me. I pushed the creaky door open, its hinges groaning in protest, and stepped inside. The darkness enveloped me, and the musty smell of decay hit me immediately. My flashlight beam cut through the shadows, revealing old furniture covered in layers of dust and cobwebs. The silence was deafening, broken only by the occasional creak of the floorboards beneath my feet. As I explored further, something caught my eye. At first, it was just a flicker of movement too quick to identify. But then, I saw it again, and this time it was unmistakable. Hundreds of cockroaches scuttling across the floor, and worse, they were crawling up the walls. My heart began to race, but I had to see more. I shined my flashlight toward the walls, and that's when I froze. The entire room was alive. Thousands of cockroaches and spiders were clinging to the walls, their dark, glistening bodies moving in an unsettling synchronized pattern. The spiders, with their long, spindly legs, were weaving webs that seemed to stretch endlessly across the cabin. The sight was enough to make my skin crawl, and the thought of being trapped in that place sent a wave of panic rushing through me. I didn't wait to see more. I turned around and bolted out of the cabin, my heart pounding in my chest. The eerie sight of those creatures still haunted me as I stumbled away, not daring to look back. I had stepped into something that should have been left untouched, and I would never go near that cabin again.
Story 5. Blood trails in an abandoned apartment.
As a property manager, I've seen my fair share of strange and unsettling things, but nothing prepared me for the nightmare I encountered in one apartment. It was a one-bedroom unit that had been occupied by a family of 5. They had broken their lease and moved out, and I was tasked with overseeing the move-out process. The moment I walked in, I could feel something was off, but I wasn't prepared for what I was about to witness. As the family moved their belongings out, it was immediately clear that their furniture was infested with cockroaches. The worst part was when they moved their mattresses, roaches poured from every crevice, dropping onto the floor and scurrying across the hall, making their way to the elevator. It was like something out of a horror movie. I'd never seen so many roaches in my life, and it made my skin crawl. But that wasn't even the worst thing I've experienced as a property manager. The true nightmare came later with a different tenant. She was always a bit of an enigma. She kept her blinds closed all the time and the unit was perpetually dark. When she moved out, I was in for a shock. We discovered an infestation of bedbugs, but that was just the beginning. I called my pest control guy in to inspect, and he showed me something I will never forget. He explained how to identify the nests, and when we looked more closely, we found something terrifying. There were blood trails everywhere. Blood smeared along every corner, across the ceilings, and even in the electrical sockets. These bedbugs had been feeding on this woman for so long and so often that they left fresh blood trails throughout the apartment. The woman had been living with this nightmare for who knows how long, and the evidence was everywhere. The apartment wasn't small, about 800 square feet, but the sheer number of bloodstains was overwhelming. Then, my pest control guy took a comb and began brushing the carpet. To my horror, a mass of bedbugs, red, wriggling creatures, came to the surface. It was as if they had been nesting there, feeding and breeding for months, maybe even longer. I've never been so disgusted in my life. The sight of those bugs and the blood, it's something I will never forget. I couldn't get out of that place fast enough. I threw away my shoes, stripped off my clothes in the hallway where no one could see, and burned them. I took a long shower to try and scrub the feeling of disgust off my skin. That carpet, those bugs and the blood, nothing I've ever seen before comes close to how horrifying that experience was.
Story 6. Haunted Hospital.
I've explored many abandoned places in the tri-state area. Decaying floors, forgotten needles, animal corpses, and more. But there's one experience I'll never forget. About 6 years ago, I ventured into an abandoned hospital in a residential part of New York City. The place had been deserted less than a decade before, but it wasn't widely known. We went at night, eager to see what secrets the place held. We started on the 2nd floor and moved up to the 3rd and 4th floors, exploring in complete silence. The hospital was eerily preserved. There was little to no graffiti, and most of the rooms seemed untouched. Patient records, tissue samples, medicines, and medical equipment were all left behind, giving the impression that the building had been evacuated in a hurry. As we reached the 4th floor, we passed by a random room with a sign that read, "No explosive gases can be used in this room." I casually read the sign aloud, and that's when it happened. We heard a loud, echoing thud from inside the room. My blood ran cold, and I froze in place. It felt like someone or something was trying to make itself known. I don't know why, but we didn't stay to investigate. We quickly turned around, and as we descended the stairs, we heard slamming doors echoing through the building. The sound was so sharp and deliberate, it made my heart race. We didn't look back, and after that night, I never returned to that hospital. The building has since been sold and is being renovated into a housing complex, but I still wonder what would have happened if we had gone into that room. What was inside? Who or what was making that noise? It's a question that still haunts me every time I think about it.
Story 7. Night I ran from the unknown.
I had been exploring abandoned buildings for years, drawn to the thrill and mystery of what might be left behind. But there's one night I will never forget. One moment that still sends chills down my spine whenever I think about it. It was supposed to be an ordinary adventure, an old factory on the outskirts of town that had been abandoned for decades. The kind of place people in the urban exploration community talk about but rarely visit. It wasn't too far from the city, and the stories about it were mostly rumors, creepy sounds, strange shadows, and maybe some leftover equipment from when the place was still in use. I went with a few friends, eager to get in and out before anyone noticed. We entered through a broken window on the second floor, careful not to alert anyone. The factory was as silent as a tomb. Dust hung in the air, and the smell of old machinery lingered. It felt like time had stopped the moment the doors had closed behind us. We explored the upper floors first, finding empty rooms filled with rusting tools, overturned filing cabinets, and shattered glass. It was eerie, but nothing I hadn't seen before. But then, we made our way to the ground floor. As soon as we stepped inside, a strange sensation hit me, like we were being watched. I tried to brush it off, thinking it was just nerves. Then we found something that made my blood run cold. A small room tucked behind a row of rusted lockers. It looked like it hadn't been disturbed in years. On the floor were several old photographs, worn and faded, and at first, I thought it was just trash. But then something caught my eye. One of the photographs depicted the factory, but in the background was a figure, a shadowy, distorted shape, standing just behind a window. It looked wrong, too tall, too dark, and there was something unnerving about its stance. That's when I heard the sound, a faint scraping like metal dragging against concrete. It was so quiet at first, but then it grew louder, echoing through the halls. My heart began to race. We moved toward the noise, but as we turned the corner, we saw something that stopped us in our tracks. A figure, no, a silhouette was slowly dragging itself across the floor, its limbs contorting unnaturally as it moved. I couldn't make out its face, but I could feel its eyes on us, like it knew we were there. At that moment, every instinct in me screamed to run. My friends looked just as horrified as I felt, and without a word, we bolted out of the building. We didn't stop until we were back in the safety of our car, breathless and shaken. To this day, I still wonder what that thing was and what would have happened if we had stayed. Some places, it seems, are better left unexplored.
Story 8. Abandoned Asylum.
I've always been drawn to abandoned places. It's a strange obsession, something about the forgotten memories and the quiet decay that calls to me. But one night, my curiosity led me to a place I never should have entered, a place that still haunts my dreams. It was an old asylum on the outskirts of town, a place that had been closed down for decades. The stories about it were endless. Rumors of violent patients, strange disappearances, and sightings of ghostly figures at the windows. Most people stayed away, but I couldn't resist. I gathered a group of friends, all eager to explore the dark, decaying halls of the long-forgotten building. We managed to get in through a hole in the fence, and from the moment we stepped onto the property, I felt it, a heaviness in the air, like the building itself was watching us. We started on the first floor, our flashlights flickering against peeling wallpaper and broken furniture. The silence was suffocating, and every creak of the floorboards seemed too loud in the stillness, but it was the second floor that changed everything. As we made our way up the stairs, I noticed something odd, a faint smell like old wet fabric mixed with something metallic. We turned the corner, and that's when I saw it. A long dark hallway stretched out before us, the walls lined with old rusted doors. The floor was covered in dark stains, and some of the doors were slightly ajar, as if something or someone was waiting inside. My friend Jake pushed open one of the doors, and we all followed him inside. The room was small, barely furnished, with a single cot against the wall. But what caught my attention were the walls. They were covered in something. At first I thought it was just old graffiti, but then I saw it clearly. Words scrawled in red, as if written by someone in a desperate frenzy. "They're watching. They're always watching. Get out while you still can." Before I could process what I was seeing, the door slammed shut behind us. We all jumped, spinning around, but the door was locked. Panic set in as we tried to open it, but it wouldn't budge. And then the whispering started. At first it was barely audible, like a breath on the back of your neck, but it grew louder, more distinct, until we could hear it clearly. "Leave now, or they'll take you." The voice was hoarse, unnatural, and it seemed to be coming from all directions. Suddenly, a figure appeared at the end of the hallway. At first I thought it was just a trick of the light, but as it came closer, I realized it was no illusion. It was a person, or what used to be a person. Their skin was pale, stretched tight over their bones, and their eyes were wide, black voids. They didn't move like a human, but more like a puppet on strings, jerking and twitching as it came toward us. I've never felt fear like that in my life. We started banging on the door, screaming for help, but the whispers grew louder. The figure was getting closer, and I swear it smiled, its mouth splitting open unnaturally wide, revealing rows of jagged teeth. In a burst of adrenaline, we managed to break open the window and climb out, barely escaping with our lives. We didn't stop running until we were far away from that building. None of us spoke on the way home. We didn't need to. We all knew what we had seen, and we all knew it was real. To this day, I have never returned to that asylum, and every time I close my eyes, I can still hear the whispers, feel the presence of those watching eyes. I can't help but wonder, what if we hadn't escaped?
Story 9. Whispers in the Hotel.
I've explored a lot of abandoned places in my time, but there's one place that still makes my skin crawl every time I think about it. It was an old abandoned hotel deep in the woods, isolated, forgotten by most, but still standing as a silent reminder of its dark past. The rumors about the hotel had been circulating for years. Strange noises, flickering lights, and sightings of figures in the windows. Of course, I didn't believe any of it, and one night, my friends and I decided to go see for ourselves. We arrived just after sunset, the sky turning a dark shade of purple as we stood in front of the hotel. The building was enormous, its once grand structure now decaying and overrun with ivy. The windows were broken, and the door creaked as we pushed it open, revealing a dusty, dimly lit lobby. The air inside was stale, the smell of mildew and rotting wood filling our nostrils. We explored the ground floor first, moving through the lobby, the old dining area, and the dark hallways. It felt like no one had stepped foot in the building for decades, but there was an unsettling stillness in the air. As we moved toward the stairwell, I noticed something strange, scratches on the walls, long, deep gashes that looked like they had been made with something sharp. At first, I thought it was just the building settling, but the further we went, the more I realized these marks didn't seem accidental. We decided to go up to the second floor. The stairs groaned under our weight, and when we reached the landing, a chill ran down my spine. There was something off about this place. It wasn't just the decay or the silence. It was the feeling of being watched. As we walked down the hallway, I noticed the door to one of the rooms was slightly ajar. Curiosity got the best of me, and I pushed the door open. The room was empty, except for a single old chair in the center. As I stepped inside, I heard a soft whisper, barely audible at first, like someone breathing close behind me. My heart skipped a beat, and I turned around, but there was no one there. Suddenly, the door slammed shut, trapping us inside. We all froze, the air thick with panic. The whispers grew louder, now accompanied by footsteps, slow and deliberate, pacing just outside the door. My friends began pounding on the door, screaming, but the sound of those footsteps was relentless. With a final forceful push, the door flung open, and we ran out into the hallway. The footsteps followed us, growing closer with every step. We sprinted down the stairs and out of the hotel, not daring to look back. But just as we reached the door, I heard a voice, soft and calm but undeniably clear. "You can never leave." We didn't stop running until we reached the car. When we looked back, the hotel was dark. No light, no sign of life. But I know what I heard, and I know what I felt. That place wasn't abandoned. It was waiting for us to enter.
Story 10. Doll That Whispers.
When I was in high school, my friends and I decided to visit a set of abandoned houses on the outskirts of our town. These houses had been bought by a large company, intended to be demolished to make room for office buildings. However, the project was abandoned, and the houses were left standing, neglected for over 20 years. I wasn't particularly excited to go, but I had recently found myself in the cool crowd and didn't want to miss out. So I reluctantly went along with the group, feeling a strange mixture of excitement and unease. The houses were falling apart, covered in graffiti, broken windows and piles of trash. The night was pitch black, and the only light we had were the weak beams from our cell phone flashlights. The atmosphere was suffocatingly silent, broken only by the occasional creak of the decaying wood beneath our feet. Most of my friends were terrified, but the older boys were loud, laughing, and making jokes to hide their fear. I told them to quiet down. I was nervous about the possibility of squatters, or worse, someone who might not want us there. As we explored the houses, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was following us. Every time I turned a corner, I felt like someone or something was just behind me, but when I turned, nothing was there. My heart raced, but I tried to brush it off as nerves. We entered the third house, and that's when I found it, a Victorian doll, old and covered in dust and cobwebs, sitting alone on the staircase. Its matted hair, torn clothing, and one missing eye made it look like something out of a nightmare. Without thinking, I picked it up, my fingers trembling. It felt cold and lifeless in my hands. The second I put it down, I heard a soft whisper, like a child's voice calling from the dark. "Mama." The voice was quiet, but unmistakable. It came from the doll. My blood ran cold and I froze, staring at my friends. They looked back at me with wide eyes, their faces as pale as mine. Without saying a word, we ran back to the car, our footsteps echoing in the silence. We didn't stop until we were miles away, not daring to look back. We never went back to that place. I've often wondered though, what was it that spoke? Was it just our imagination, or was something darker at play that night?
Thanks for joining us on this terrifying adventure. If tonight's story gave you chills, let us know in the comments below, and share your own scary experiences too. Don't forget to leave a like if you want more nightmares, and subscribe if you haven't already. Until next time, sleep tight, and remember, not all shadows are empty.